Good morning, everyone. Welcome to middle of February 18th. It's a great joy to be back on Top Voice Tuesday today with Tim Teen, and really am excited about this conversation for a number of reasons. I think we were talking just before we got started about this idea of kind of the syllabus over the last 4 weeks has been really, I think, leading to this conversation about the board. So we're going to jump in here in a second, Tim. I'll give you a chance to share your story with everyone. But for those just joining in, please do put in the chat where you're from. We love questions. We love to hear where everybody's coming from. And as always, these episodes are hosted on my YouTube channel, Michael J. Lopez 9, which you can find. We've got all 6 of the ones we've done up until now. So again, super excited. Please do put in the chat. Let's get rolling. So fellow Top Voice, Tim Teen, tell us a little bit about you, Tim, and what you do, and then how you got to become a Top Voice.
Michael, thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you for having me here. I love this series that you've put together, and I'm flattered to be on it. So my whole career started what I would call on the sales and marketing side of privately held business-to-business companies. Along the way, I've founded 7 different companies. I've had some pretty successful exits with my partners. And so we created a venture capital fund, about $100 million, really investing in small, early stage companies. And what gave birth to Blue Ocean Capital Partners, what I've been doing for the past 25 years with the same partners, mind you, is working with management teams, leadership teams, unlocking potential, unlocking revenue, and really just sharing learned experience. Because the one thing I've seen is specifically in privately held companies, it's a lonely job to be on the leadership team. It's lonely at the top. And, sometimes our advice is what to do. And a lot of times it's what not to do because we made that mistake and we could tell you how to prevent it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I use this phrase unlock potential, and it's so similar to what I do from a different angle, right? And I think it's one of the reasons we kind of hit it off so early about, kind of coming at this problem from both sides, right? How do you lead? How do you grow? How do you realize the opportunities that you have? And some of it's about structure and strategy, and some of it's about the humans and the people in there that sort of need that work. So, hey, Nikki, I see you in the chat. It's great to be there. She may be the biggest champion of this little series we've started. So, Nikki, it's great to see you on the chat. And for everyone else, please do let us know where you're coming in from and questions you might have. So, Tim, before we dive into some of the questions about this idea of the board agenda and what we're seeing in uncertainty, tell us about your Top Voice journey. How did you start your journey to be active on LinkedIn, and when did you get the badge, and what has that looked like?
So I've had the badge for probably 7-8 months now, if I had to guess. And to be very honest with you, it's nothing that I set out specifically to achieve. But I'm always active in commenting, and I try to give quality comments versus, hi, Mike, great post or good info with a thumbs up. I try to give a perspective, short, to the point, pithy, but let you know I read your post. This is a human responding. I read your post. And then one day I received an email and the badge was on my profile. And quite honestly, I didn't even pay attention to it until some other people said, hey, congratulations on the Top Voice. And I kind of looked into it and said, wow, this is awesome. Recently received a new email that they'll be reevaluating the entire program and putting a little more rigor to it, which is fantastic. But Mike, I'm happy I got it because that's how you and I met. But clearly, it was nothing I set out specifically to achieve.
Yeah. This is a trend. I think each week we've got some folks that I think first theme you just mentioned is you didn't set out to sort of get a badge or recognition, but you set out to engage with the community. And I love about what you just said in terms of comments. And we heard this from Graham in the first week that we started this, which is, comments really do create engagement. And that's a big part of what people are looking for. And folks are always looking for ways to figure out how to be more effective on LinkedIn. And so that's a great way. Comment one of the other things that I did in my journey is if you ever get invited to contribute to some of the articles, you'll get little contributor posts. Absolutely do that. It's a great way to drive engagement. So congrats, Tim, on your journey through the forest to arrive at the mountaintop. So well done. So let's talk about the board, and we talk about uncertainty, and we're certainly in a new time. We've covered it in the last 3 weeks. What is the board talking about? What are those sources of uncertainty for the board? What's going on in those rooms, and what are they worried about?
I spend a good percentage of my time, probably at least 50% of my time, either attending board meetings as an outside observer, as a board member, or with individual board members who say, hey, here's some topics we want to take offline. And one thing I want to do is maybe just back up a second before we jump into the tactical issues that people are talking about in the boardroom. And I love the title uncertainty, because we need to kind of pull at that. Uncertainty is a state of not knowing, right? And when you don't know, you're not sure, that elevates risk. And risk is something that businesses need to deal with on a daily basis. But when you don't understand the risk, unfortunately, the human condition creates fear. And that's the problem here, because so many times I come to boards, they're fearful. And part of it is because they don't know what the challenges are, or if they understand the challenges, they don't know what the optionality is to address those. And the one thing I would say from the top is just having that communication, just talking about uncertainty and risk and fear lowers the concern. It kind of brings it down, because then the mind can wrap itself around it and say, I got it. This isn't fight or flight. This isn't life or death. These are issues we need to figure out an outcome with. So I just kind of wanted to set that thematically as some of the things that I've seen in board meetings. Sometimes we just have to talk through. Fear is a good thing, right? It prevents us from putting our hand on a hot stove. Irrational fear prevents us from getting up in the morning. And you kind of got to swing that pendulum somewhere in between what you should be concerned about, what you should act on. But at the end of the day, you should talk about all of it, because that will kind of reset it.
Yeah, there's a great parallel to the stuff I do there, in the sense of one of the things I talk about in the book I wrote, but in the work I do for clients, is rebuilding what you're describing is rebuilding your relationship with stress, right? Which is understanding that there's levels to this. And stress is an incredible focuser of our resources in the mind and the ability to pay attention to things that matter. But we know that chronic, enduring, sort of uncontrolled stress is really debilitating. And I think what's great about what you're describing is that, a boardroom is composed of human beings, and they're having the same response everybody else does. And I think that's great. Again, it's just a great way of coming at the same experience from two different angles. We need to hang out more in boardrooms, because I can help you kind of do that. So yeah, great. Go ahead and keep going. Let's talk about the sources.
So let's bring it down to now the tactical aspect. Now that we know what you're going through as an individual, there's no question that the thing on everybody's mind right now is Washington, right? There's been a change in administration, a new way of doing business, right or wrong. I'm not political. I'm not trying to make a political statement. I'm a business person, and whatever the rules of the jungle are, you need to know them, you need to understand them, and you need to react to them. And I think the biggest concern, moving past some of the things that are happening in Washington, is there's going to be a reckoning with the cost of capital. And for instance, I deal with a lot of vintage level CEOs who have never seen a cost of capital. They've never seen the ability to, if they needed to grow, they raised the prices. They had a price increase and it grew 6-8%. The healthcare industry has been doing this since its inception. Right. Well, there's a lot of industries that can't reflexively grow by saying, hey, sales team, new price schedule, raise prices 8 to 10% because of the pushback. So that's forcing the C-suite, okay, let's think a little differently. But some of them don't know what to even consider. If I can't grow through price increase, do I go through acquisition? What do you mean there's a cost of capital? I've been able to borrow for effectively, no interest rate on the money and the structured finance I've worked with. So that's probably the biggest thing that I'm seeing, because the ability to just year over year pounding a price increase, revenue covers a lot of ills. So when you're generating outsized revenues year over year, you're less inclined to look at the structural impediments in your company. Now that that is softened, there's not that level of growth through price increase. And I see this with a lot of clients, private equity firms that bring me in. There's some real problems structurally in a lot of these sub $100 million revenue privately held companies.
Yeah. I think, I think what you're describing out here in California, many of my clients in the tech space, right? We saw that growth covered a lot of, they didn't have to worry about what they were spending money on. And then all of a sudden things start to change, and, you've seen the wave of layoffs year over year, and now they're having the same issues. So yeah, that's, in the sports world, we call that winning solves a lot of problems and covers up a lot of evils. Losing gets a little tougher. So yeah.
Yeah, that exposes everything. It's like, the old The Big Short made it famous, the hot hand fallacy, right? Somebody hits 5 shots in a row, throw them the ball, they're going to hit the sixth one. There's no basis that that's even, unless you're Michael Jordan.
That's right.
But there's no basis that that's even accurate. But that's kind of the herd mentality, and I see that, and I'll give you a good example. I knew a lot of people. One of the sectors that we had a lot of experience in was health tech, third-party administrators, employee benefits firms, insurance carriers. And I know quite a few people that sold their third-party administrator firms because of the specter of cybersecurity and HIPAA compliance. So they worked through HIPAA compliance, but over the last 5, 6, 7 years, cybersecurity, right? What firm do you know doesn't have a cybersecurity plan? So a lot of people got nervous. They were hearing this is millions of dollars of cost, and they pulled the trigger to either sell their companies prematurely or at a deflated value, or rush into some kind of partnership. And then lo and behold, there's plenty of solutions on the market to make your systems cyber compliant. And that's a clear case of fear overriding the board. We're not going to be able to afford to do this. Let's just dump this asset. And there's firms that have been acquiring companies. The Warren Buffett run into the opportunity when everybody's running out of it, because
Right.
there's a good purchase to be had.
Right. Right. Okay. So what else in terms of, you talked about the cost of capital and some of these things. What are the other big things that boards are kind of reacting to outside of maybe some of the policy changes that are obviously coming down in a feverish rush from Washington?
Well, you had a great conversation, and I had the opportunity to see it. And I would implore anybody who's listening now to go back through your prior sessions. You had a great conversation with Kaleem, and I think there's going to be a second phase of return to work friction. I live right outside of New York City. I think Jamie Dimon is one of the sharpest bankers in the history of banking.
He's been in the news a lot with
And
his
I mean,
audio. Yeah.
and it's been the joke in the industry. And I've worked in investment banking and private equity, so I have a lot of people that would be considered bankers. And the joke in the industry is, probably a year ago, they have a gorgeous facility on Park Avenue. I mean, I would want to work there. There's no question, but nobody wants to commute to New York anymore. The cost, the time, the aggravation. So the edict was everybody in the office. That didn't work. Okay, a month later, everybody in the office. I really, really mean it. Nobody cared. So it's become this, line in the sand. Don't cross this line. Okay, don't cross this line. Coupled with the latest audio that everybody said, one of the issues we'll always talk about is headline risk. This is the first time I've ever seen Jamie Dimon run head first into headline risk with that audio. But it's going to be a reckoning. I'm dealing with some companies that have, 75 to 150 employees. And they've had people that have just moved from New York. They live out in Pennsylvania somewhere. They relocated to their summer homes. And now the companies are going, well, everybody's starting to come back to work, and they're not coming back. So there's going to be a second employee level of friction coming.
Are we seeing boards that is there? I certainly hear and see. We talked to Kaleem about the friction between the C-suite and employees, but are boards taking a strong stand on this? Are they saying let's adjust? Are they pounding the table? Is it all of the above? It just depends.
I think it's a case by case basis. While all this is going on, you have some organizations that come out and say, we hire people who we want to be part of the team because they fit culturally and we trust them. We don't care where they live. We don't care where they work as long as they perform. And then you have labor unions to say, well, what about our people that have to show up at the factory and put the bumper on the car? They can't do that from home. How is this fair? So, it's a barbell conversation. I can literally see both sides of the equation. And I think in many instances, it comes down to what is the culture you have at the company. And personally, I think it's where are you in your career path? I know if I was under 5 years, younger in a new company, I'd want to be there. I'd want to be in the culture. I'd want to meet the people. Who's my boss's boss? You want that exposure. At my station in life now, that doesn't matter to me. I can work anywhere because I'm addressing boards. They don't need to see me in their office. But it's clearly on a case by case basis, and I think it has to do with what the overall objective of the C-suite is.
Yeah, yeah. Would love to get some great comments from Nikki in the chat just about engagement and fears and uncertainty. Would love to take a question or two as you're thinking about this conversation, which I just think is really, really critical because I think the board is so responsible for, to your point, not just the financial performance, but the enduring culture of the organization. And I think you brought up that word in a way that I was going to get there. What's the tension between the C-suite and the board, if there is, around some of these conversations? Are we seeing a pushback, a passive tension, an active tension? What is happening between that relationship?
I think the answer to that, Michael, is yes. We're seeing passive and certainly active. First and foremost, your leadership team needs to realize that your board is there to consult. They're there to create the guardrails on the highway that you're pursuing. They're there to keep you in bounds legally, ethically, financially, so you're not betting the farm. Hey, I know we're a company that does X. We invested everything in Y. How did we get there? So it's that level of fiduciary responsibility. But your board is not management. And sometimes the board oversteps their boundaries and says, Michael, what you need to do is this. And there's a level of, let me see your report. Let me see that presentation. That's a level of involvement that's usually going to create a lot of friction, certainly if it's not asked for. And so I always say to the leadership team, just realize if you invite the board in with a certain question, be prepared for the answer, be prepared for the involvement. So if you say to somebody, I think we have a problem engaging our client base, maybe our collateral material isn't sufficient. They're going to say, let me see the collateral material. And you're going to be, I can't believe I'm sending my presentation to a board for review and using this as an example. And now we're off to the races with friction. Most boards don't want to be involved at that level. They want to consult. They want to share their experience, and they want to set broader term objectives, going through some of the concerns and risks we have, whether it be political, environmental, operational, and help set a structure and a strategy that the management team will deliver against.
It's a great. You mentioned this earlier about the shifts in Washington, and without maybe addressing any specific policy change, I'd be interested to know how are boards viewing this window of time in the sense of have we seen this before? Is it truly new territory? Which of these whether it's tariffs, whether it's some of the layoffs happening in Washington, what is the stuff coming from there that they're really dialed in on or worried about? Or is this just we've never seen this either, we're making this up as we go along? How is that reaction happening?
I think it falls into a couple of camps, Michael. And one of them is there's some things that we're talking about that we've never talked about before. How are tariffs going to affect my supply base? How are tariffs going to affect my revenue if I'm an exporter into a country that is going to quid pro quo on their tariff for our products? If you had a program with DEI, Are you still embracing DEI? If you were heavily involved in ESG, are you still embracing ESG? Some companies have just went new sheriff in town and you hear the papers being torn up. We don't do that anymore. And that to me is, a little weakness in leadership. You need to say, hey, we have a plan that's going to work for us. We're going to go forward. We're going to see what's coming out of Washington, whatever it might be, and we're going to accommodate and react accordingly. But Washington, D.C. has proven itself through any administration. They don't know how to run a business. So I'm not going to take business leadership from a group of people that can't manage trillions of dollars in revenue. So, just to kind of put a fine point on that.
Yeah. There's a question from Nikki about our previous conversation about sort of setting expectations. How can the board and sort of CXOs set expectations for one another? Back to that, I've invited you in, but I only want to hear part of what you have to say, kind of experience. How does that relationship management work?
No, that's a great question. So I know accountability is critical in the relationship with the board. You have to, if you're management, if you're a CXO, you have to do what you say what you do, deliver on time. And if you're not going to deliver on time, having been in the board, getting an email, hey, I know I'd have this done by March 15th. We're hitting some unforeseen challenges. It's going to be off. I can accept that. What human can't? We all live in the adage of businesses plan and life happens, right? Things come up. That is totally acceptable. What's not acceptable is, oh yeah, I know you. Yeah, I know I was supposed to have that done. God, whatever happened, let me get back to you. That is going to ruin expectations. It ruins your credibility. And quite honestly, I've been in board meetings where the board's talking about having an employee fired just because they don't believe the person can deliver. That's not a kind of topic you'd want to hear. You certainly don't want your name bandied about a board meeting because you can't deliver. So setting expectations really comes down to very clear communications, agreeing with what you know you can deliver, and communicating.
It brings up an interesting point about the, and we didn't talk about this much as in the run up to this, but so I'm throwing you a curveball. But we've seen in the last several years, particularly leading up to the election, the activist investor experience of pockets of ownership trying to drive whether it's strategy or whether it's agenda inside of the company. How does that get managed at this level between this board C-suite relationship?
Fortunately for me, most of that is at the public company level, and it's a much deeper game in terms of revenue. You're talking tens and hundreds of millions, and anybody that wants to see probably the best activist shareholder ever, just read some stories about Carl Icahn and the way he would wear down management teams, and just he's just a force of nature, including things like, hey, we have a company here that has 80 fax machines. Why so much? And he'll spend hours talking about fax machines, but that the point isn't the differential is going to be made with 80 or 70. The point is he's just a relentless, and the shareholder activist is there just to change the model. Something in their perception, right or wrong, something in their perception is not operating, is not generating sufficient cash. It's not producing sufficient returns or distributions. So they don't come in with a surgical approach. They come in and say, everything is broken. We're going to fix everything. And if you don't like it, we'll replace you. And it can become, and most of the times it becomes very, very antagonistic. It's not a pleasant situation to be in. Now, you can have the same in a private company. If you have an investor that owns, 60, 70, 80% of your company, but typically in a private company, it's less around these kind of issues. Why do we have, 200 vice presidents, each making $600,000 a year? It's more around, I don't agree with how you're running the company. You don't agree with how I want to set the expectations for the company. You could work that out. But a shareholder activist, and there's quite a few of them. Bill Ackerman's another. These are guys that play in the deep end of the pool, and they're not afraid. They're certainly very, very aggressive.
It calls to mind. It's interesting. We've sort of been talking about this um, experience of a little bit of evolution versus revolution. And what I do in my world is, environmental shifts. And I don't mean the physical environment like outside, although that could be part of it. Environmental shifts and the removal of access to old behaviors, constraints around new behaviors are some of the biggest change triggers we can experience, right? So things like policies coming down, things like regulations being unearthed or removed. And so I'm curious about, and of course, the same brain that evolved us into the situation we're in isn't always the same brain that's going to get us out as things are changing around us. Like, what do you think are the big blind spots in the board these days? And that's a general question. Many boards are different, but like, what are they not seeing? What are we not considering given everything else that's happening?
Well, Steve Jobs and Albert Einstein will both say the person that created the problem is not the person that can take you out of it, right? They've made that kind of foundation of their thought process. One of the biggest things is that people still struggle with is there is no rule book. It's not what you think it was. My vintage level of board member and CEO, if they're not opening their aperture to new models of distribution, SaaS models, who would have ever thought that this is how software would be delivered? And who ever thought that AI would come along and just upend the apple cart? So when I sit in board meetings and somebody's still talking product, price, promotion, and distribution, it's like, guys, that that's the that's a management approach from the 80s. That's not going to apply today. So the blind spot is truly not knowing what you don't know. And most board members are supposed to be provocative. They're supposed to have a level of futurist in them. Well, what would happen if we did the following? And what would happen if we used AI? Or what would happen if, you need to get the human condition thinking. And when you think about things you normally don't consider, you generally come up with answers or solutions that make a lot of sense. But if you're approaching this and your aperture is only so wide, or you have blinders on, you've inherently created a blind spot for yourself without even knowing what your blind spot is. So
Yeah, you brought up two things there, and we're getting close. And I want to take another question if folks have one. But you brought up two things that I think are super important that you alluded to. One is the composition of the board, right? And so, do you have a diversity of not just I mean that in the sort of the kind of gender, age, experience diversity, although that's part of it. But do you have a diversity of thought and experience in ways that actually bring new ideas? And so I'd love to get your perspective on that, and how are we seeing board diversity shift, evolve, board mix change over time, or are we not?
it becomes complicated because board composition usually in private companies has been left to those people that have an equity investment. So they're there to watch their money, so to speak. What smart boards have been considering is observer seats and independent board members. And certainly that's something I consult or I would share with somebody. Hey, listen, do we have an SEO strategy? When the board members are looking at you going, SEO, yeah, that's like that Facebook stuff. Oh boy, we got to get our arms around this. Bring somebody in, pay them to advise the board on a monthly basis, or to sometimes the best ideas come from a futurist who could talk about what's the impact. And I'm leading into one of Nikki's questions here.
Yeah.
What's the impact of technology? How do we reduce, if I can't raise revenue reflexively through a price increase, can I lower my operating costs 10, 12, 15% without impacting the customer? I think in any industry today with the advent of AI and other technologies coming down the pipe, the answer is yes, you can. But if you're not talking about it, by the time you get around to introducing it, you're already on to another paradigm of management that you're not keeping up with. So you want your board to stay ahead of you and ahead of the company, bringing those challenges to the table and not having management say, hey, where should I use AI in my company? it's kind of too late at that point.
Yeah, there's a great tie back. That was the other thing I was going to mention. So you sort of beat me to the punch there, which is great on this AI conversation. Back to the conversation we had with Phil a couple of weeks ago, which is this idea, his sort of 5P model, right? Which is, the first thing you do is you sort of it helps you personally, right? How does AI remove pieces, and then it helps you at the process level and the project level. I'm probably not getting that exactly right, but I think that's a conversation to Nikki's question about, for those that can't see it, maybe how would you explain how technology has affected corporations where boards had to evolve and revolutionize this conversation. I think you're saying is, how is the board leading this conversation, helping the C-suite explore and expand their thinking? And of course, within the board, you have that own challenge of how are you exploring and expanding your own thinking, and that's a really interesting change conversation. It's a really interesting diversity conversation, which kind of actually leads, as we wrap up here, to your bonus question for the week. So everyone who watches this knows we do a bonus question. It is about diversity and this idea of board diversity, and how are you, in a consultant role that you have, sort of championing this idea, particularly given what's happening in the DEI space? Like, how are you finding this conversation, and how are you contributing to, supporting different groups that are now a little bit under fire based on some of the policy changes that are coming down?
So my philosophy has always been, when you make it to the top floor, you send the elevator back down to the lobby for somebody else.
I love that.
And I'm a product of that myself, right? Everybody who stands on success is really standing on the shoulders of somebody, multiple people through their lives, whether it's, a grammar school person, a coach. There's always been people that have added to your success journey. And to me, the indomitable potential of the individual, if you find people that are willing and committed and have the raw bandwidth, but just don't have the experience, I give that person, in any organization I've been involved in, I give that person an opportunity 10 out of 10 times, because I've found that it's amazing. The more you're sitting around looking at a problem, the more people who contribute to how to address that from their own life experience or from their own shared experience and learned experience, usually the answer is part of your competitive advantage, because nobody else has thought of it. So I'm a big believer in getting a lot of people around the table. I like performance, and you perform and you can do the job. I want you on the team.
Yeah. No, that's great, Tim. I appreciate it. And I just want to say thanks for your time today. This has been great. I mean, again, what a great run up to this conversation of going back to the office, DEI, AI, board diversity, and new thinking, the role that fear and uncertainty play in our mindset, and how do we create communication between the board and the C-suite. A really great kind of top down, inside out view that you've shared. I want to give you the floor, Tim, to offer anything up to folks that have attended. Anything you want to share with them before we say goodbye for the morning?
Thank you for having me, Michael. That's first and foremost. I think what you're doing here is fantastic, creating this community, creating this communication. And anybody listening and participating, it's easy to get me on LinkedIn if you have any questions. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't have a, we spent a half hour, here's my bill. That's not how I operate. Most of the people I talk to never develop into a business opportunity, but I feel that's part of my personal karma. I help as many people as I can. It's come back to me full time in ways I couldn't even imagine. So if you need to engage on anything or brainstorm, I'm available.
What a great message to leave on, which is to give without expectation of return. Thank you, Tim. Thank you for everyone who's dialed in today. Really enjoying this experience with you all, and way to bring us home on this conversation, Tim. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Michael.